The night my wife laughed at me in front of 28,000 healthcare executives and industry leaders, she thought she was watching me shrink. But what she really saw was the moment I stopped being her husband and became the paper trail she could not outrun. I stood beneath the blue-white glow of the HIMSS sponsor wall in Chicago, surrounded by hospital executives, venture partners, software founders, policy consultants, and men in tailored suits who talked about patient outcomes like they were quarterly earnings. My badge said Nathan Mercer, Healthcare Compliance Counsel, but Claire had spent months making sure nobody in her new world saw me that way. To her, I was the husband with the 5-year-old Ford Explorer, the plain navy suit, and the irritating habit of asking why expensive things never came with clear receipts. Across the lounge, she stood beside Dr. Julian Cross, CEO of HelixBridge Health, wearing a silver dress I had never seen before and laughing like she belonged in his spotlight more than in our marriage. His face smiled from a 40-foot screen above the entrance beside the words "Scaling AI-Driven Care Across America." Claire saw me first. Her smile changed for half a second. Not guilt. Annoyance. Julian followed her gaze, saw me, and placed one hand lightly at the small of her back, public enough to humiliate me, subtle enough to deny later. Then he raised his champagne glass and said, "Nathan, right? Claire's husband. I've heard about you. You used to review forms for a living." A few people chuckled because powerful men teach rooms when to laugh. Claire did not correct him. She did not step away. She tilted her head and said, "Nathan is more comfortable behind spreadsheets than inside rooms like this." That cut deeper than Julian's insult because she knew better. She knew I had spent 16 years inside healthcare fraud investigations, vendor audits, False Claims Act exposure reviews, and board-level compliance cleanups. She knew I had watched confident executives go silent when numbers stopped matching records. But expertise had stopped impressing Claire once it no longer came wrapped in status. She wanted private dinners, skyline, suites, first-class upgrades, investor circles, and men who made her feel important before the bill came due. Julian smiled at the circle around him and said, "Claire understands momentum. Some people see healthcare as paperwork. We see transformation." Then he looked at me. Try not to slow her down anymore. The room waited to see if I would become useful to him. Jealous, loud, wounded, easy to dismiss. Claire's eyes narrowed, almost daring me to embarrass myself. I felt the heat in my chest, but pain is not a summons, and humiliation is not an instruction. I gave them nothing. No scene, no threat, no wounded husband speech they could repeat later. Instead, I looked past Julian's watch, past Claire's diamond bracelet, past the champagne, and read the sponsor slide like a deposition exhibit. HelixBridge Health, National Care Optimization, Predictive Patient Engagement, $60 million in implementation pipeline. Then I saw the vendor logo in the lower corner. Northlake Clinical Integration. 3 weeks earlier, that name had appeared in a reimbursement packet sent to me by an investment group requesting a quiet compliance review before joining HelixBridge's next funding round. Northlake had billed nearly $900,000 for patient outreach services across states where it showed no physical staff, no registered clinical office, and no clear operational footprint. I had marked it unresolved. Standing under those lights, watching my wife lean toward the man who had just mocked me, I realized unresolved had walked onto a 40-foot screen wearing a sponsor badge. My phone vibrated once inside my jacket. Owen Price, the forensic data auditor helping me review HelixBridge, had sent 5 words. "Vendor shell pattern looks real." I slipped the phone away and looked at Claire one more time. She was laughing again, relieved I had not challenged him. Julian leaned close and whispered near her ear, safe enough for a public room, but intimate enough to be cruel. She smiled like a woman who believed she had traded up. That was when I understood our marriage was not cracking. It had already been sold off in pieces, one private dinner, one hotel upgrade, one hidden expense, and one public insult at a time. Julian raised his glass as photographers moved closer. "Tomorrow," he said, "HelixBridge steps onto the national stage." I almost smiled, not because I wanted revenge. Revenge wants noise. Consequence wants records. And by the time Dr. Julian Cross stepped onto that stage, I intended to know exactly which records he had been hiding. Claire had not become cruel overnight, and that made it harder to hate her cleanly. A sudden betrayal gives you one sharp moment to remember. A slow betrayal leaves receipts. 8 months before Chicago, she came home from a healthcare conference in San Diego with a new suitcase, a new watch, and a new way of looking at our house, as if the walls had gotten smaller while she was gone. She said the trip had been exhausting, but her eyes kept lighting up when she talked about the private reception, the hospital presidents, the venture partners, and Dr. Julian Cross. At first, his name sounded professional. Julian believes the industry is ready for transformation. Julian says partnerships have to move faster. Julian thinks I have executive presence. I listen because husbands are supposed to listen, and because there is nothing illegal about a powerful man praising your wife at work. But there is a difference between mentorship and replacement, and I began to hear it in the pauses. She stopped saying we when she talked about the future. She started saying people like us, but somehow I was never included in the room she met. Our kitchen in Arlington, Virginia, became a place she passed through, not a place she lived. She would drop her keys beside the mail, glance at whatever contract or vendor report I was reviewing, and say, "Are you still buried in documents?" The first time, I smiled. The fifth time, I closed the laptop. Then her calendar changed. Strategy dinners ran past midnight. Partnership calls moved to Sunday afternoons. Last-minute trips appeared with vague explanations and first-class upgrades she insisted were covered by the company. I did not accuse her. Accusations are cheap without facts, and I had spent too many years watching people ruin clean cases by speaking before evidence was ready. So I watched patterns. A hotel charge in Miami during a week she was supposed to be in Atlanta. A ride service receipt from a private terminal outside Teterboro. A boutique in Manhattan billing a dress under client presentation apparel. She called those details harmless. I called them data points. Before Julian, Claire used to say my caution made her feel safe. After Julian, caution became fear. Due diligence became insecurity. Compliance became paperwork. One February night, while snow tapped against the windows and I was making coffee at 10 because a West Coast investor needed a contract review by morning, she stood in the doorway wearing a black coat I had never seen before. An overnight bag rested beside her feet. "You know, Nathan," she said, "not every dream needs an audit." I remember the sentence because it sounded rehearsed, not by her, but for her. "Where are you going?" I asked. "New York." Julian moved the partner dinner up. "You told me Boston." The schedule changed. "Commercial or company jet?" She laughed without warmth. "That is what I mean. You hear New York and your first thought is transportation documentation. My first thought is that my wife is leaving the house at 9:40 at night for a dinner she did not mention this morning." Her face hardened. Julian understands this world. He does not make me feel guilty for succeeding. That was the first time she used his name as a weapon. After she left, I did not follow her. I did not call 10 times. I did not send some desperate message a lawyer could one day read aloud in a conference room. I walked upstairs, opened the fireproof safe in my office, and copied our joint account statements, retirement summaries, mortgage records, insurance policies, and tax filings. That was not revenge. That was adulthood. By spring, Claire had become fluent in the language of people drifting too close to a cliff. Momentum, vision, optics, access. Her phone stayed face down. Her smile came alive only when certain notifications appeared. She bought dresses that did not match her salary and jewelry that did not match any bonus she had mentioned. 2 weeks before HIMSS, an unsigned email arrived on my encrypted business account. The subject line said, "Look at HelixBridge before Chicago." Attached were billing extracts, vendor payments, patient engagement summaries, and internal messages tied to Julian Cross, Northlake Clinical Integration, and a $60 million expansion pipeline. That night, Claire came home after midnight carrying a garment bag and smelling like airport lounge coffee. She saw the light under my office door. "Still working?" she asked. I looked at the documents on my screen, then at the woman who had promised me honesty 12 years earlier in a courthouse with bad carpet and vending machine coffee. "Yes," I said. "Still working." She smiled like she pitied me and went upstairs, unaware that the man she had learned to dismiss was sitting 10 feet away from the first thread that could unravel everything Julian Cross had built. The anonymous file did not arrive like a threat. It arrived like a warning from someone who had decided silence was finally more dangerous than fear. I waited until Claire went upstairs, until I heard the shower start and the bedroom door close, then moved the email into an isolated review folder and disconnected my laptop from our home network. Years in compliance teach a man one rule. Never treat unexpected evidence like a gift. Treat it like a document that can save you or ruin you depending on how cleanly you handle it. I did not know who had sent it. I did not know whether the files were complete. I did not know whether someone was exposing Julian Cross or trying to bait me because of Claire. So I slowed down. The first attachment was labeled Patient Engagement Summary. On the surface, HelixBridge looked impressive. Thousands of high-risk patients contacted. Engagement rates that barely moved across different states. Savings projections polished enough to make investors lean forward. That was exactly what bothered me. Healthcare data is rarely beautiful. It is messy, delayed, duplicated, corrected, and argued over because every decimal can become a deposition exhibit. HelixBridge's numbers were too clean. Then I opened the Northlake Clinical Integration Invoice packet, and the first crack widened. Northlake had billed for outreach teams in Ohio, Arizona, Florida, and Pennsylvania during the same 2-week period, but every invoice traced back to one small office suite outside Wilmington, Delaware. No regional staff list. No clinical credentialing roster. No call center footprint. Just invoices, payment approvals, and language designed to impress people who did not ask boring questions. I have built my career on boring questions. At 1:15 in the morning, I called Owen Price in Portland. Owen was a forensic data auditor, calm in a way that made people listen. "If this is about HelixBridge," he said, "I was hoping you had not opened it yet." "Too late," I said. "Tell me what I am looking at." He paused. Maybe fraud. Maybe reckless expansion. Maybe someone inside was trying to save themselves before the board started asking why the revenue model did not match the records. I opened the expense classification file while he spoke, and that was where my marriage entered the spreadsheet. Under clinical adoption events, there were charges for private dining, executive lodging, VIP transportation, and presentation assets. One entry was dated 3 days before Claire came home with the diamond bracelet. Description: Executive Engagement Support, Chicago Preview Dinner. Amount: $8,700. I leaned back and looked at the dark kitchen window, where my reflection stared back like a witness waiting to be sworn in. I did not know whether Claire knew how the bracelet had been paid for. I knew she accepted it. I knew she wore it. I knew she looked offended when I asked where it came from. That mattered. Not because it proved a crime. Because it proved appetite. Julian had found the part of my wife that wanted admiration more than honesty, and he fed it with corporate money disguised as success. By 2:30, Owen and I had a preliminary map. HelixBridge appeared to be presenting projected savings as validated outcomes. Patient engagement logs showed copied patterns. Vendor services were vague. Hospital expansion materials leaned on numbers that did not reconcile with raw files. Then I found an internal message from a HelixBridge finance director warning Julian that Northlake's support documentation was thin and would not survive a serious reimbursement review. Julian's reply was short: "Clean the deck. We present at Chicago." I read it twice. Julian had been warned. He had chosen the stage anyway. Around 4, Claire came downstairs for water. The bracelet flashed under the kitchen light. "Still doing investor work?" she asked. "Yes." She crossed her arms. "You should come to Chicago with a better attitude. Julian is giving me visibility most people would kill for." I looked at the bracelet, then at her face. Visibility is not protection. She laughed softly. "This is why people do not invite compliance husbands to exciting places." Then she went back upstairs. I stayed in the dark until sunrise, building a clean chain of custody, copying nothing to personal devices, and marking every file with source uncertainty. I had not accused my wife. I had not contacted Julian. I had not decided what I could prove. But I knew this much. Claire thought Chicago would show me the life she deserved. Julian thought Chicago would make him untouchable. Neither understood that the bigger the stage, the more expensive the lie becomes when the numbers underneath it collapse. By the time I returned to the HIMSS reception that night, I was no longer walking into a room where my wife had embarrassed me. I was walking into a room where 2 careless people believed applause could drown out arithmetic. The private dinner was on the top floor of a downtown Chicago hotel, all glass walls, white tablecloths, and city lights bright enough to make bad judgment look expensive. Claire had texted me the room number 20 minutes earlier, not because she wanted me there, but because appearances still mattered. A missing husband raised questions. A present husband, seated far away and treated like furniture, answered them. When I arrived, Julian Cross stood at the center of the table like he owned the skyline. Claire sat to his right, not mine, with the diamond bracelet catching the light every time she moved her hand. Around them were venture partners, health system executives, a hospital chief financial officer, two consultants, and one outside counsel I recognized from a prior settlement negotiation in Dallas. That mattered. Rooms like that pretend to be social until the wrong sentence turns them into evidence. Julian opened his arms. Nathan made it, he said. I was afraid the spreadsheets had kept him hostage. A few people laughed, but not everyone. The hospital CFO looked at my badge, then back at Julian, and his expression shifted. He knew what healthcare compliance counsel meant, even if Julian wanted to reduce it to paperwork. Claire pointed me toward the seat farthest from her, near the wall, where servers could pass behind me. A neat little insult, polished enough to look accidental. I sat without giving her the injury she wanted to see. I unfolded my napkin, ordered sparkling water, and listened. Julian performed before the first course arrived. Predictive modeling. Patient activation. National scale. $60 million in expansion pipeline. He said accountability 3 times and documentation 0 times. Claire looked enchanted, not by the words, but by the room reacting to them. Julian had turned admiration into something she could consume. When a Boston investor asked whether the savings estimates had been externally validated, Julian smiled. We have robust internal modeling. Our partners care about outcomes, not outdated audit culture. Claire laughed softly. Nathan thinks every dream needs a paper trail. The table turned toward me. There it was again, the invitation to shrink. I took a sip of water and said, only the expensive ones. For the first time that night, the laughter did not belong to Julian. It moved around the table in small, uncertain pieces. The outside counsel looked at me more carefully. Julian's smile stayed in place, but the skin around his eyes tightened. Compliance people mistake caution for leadership, he said. No, I answered evenly. We mistake unsupported numbers for unsupported numbers. Claire's head snapped toward me. It was not loud enough to be a confrontation, but it was enough to change the air. Julian leaned back. You should be proud of your wife. Claire has helped us build relationships men with your mindset would never reach. I am aware Claire has been involved in relationship building, I said. I did not look at the bracelet. I did not have to. Her hand dropped into her lap, and 3 people noticed. That is how records begin sometimes, not with a confession, but with a room realizing it may need to remember exactly what was said. Julian recovered by talking louder. He gave a short speech about risk takers and innovators brave enough to build before bureaucracy gave permission. Claire looked at me like bravery had been defined and I had been found lacking. Then a partner from Boston asked how much of the $60 million depended on federal reimbursement-linked programs. Julian waved one hand. The money follows the outcomes. The outside counsel asked, audited outcomes or projected outcomes? Julian paused for less than a second. I saw it. Truth does not need a pause to find safer words. Validated outcomes, he said. That was not an answer. It was a bridge with no support underneath. My phone vibrated. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway near the elevators. Owen's message was waiting. Northlake has no operational capacity matching invoices. Duplicate patient contact clusters across 3 states. Check expense code CE 17. I opened my earlier note and found the same code tied to Claire's bracelet. When I returned, Julian was telling the table that resistance always came from people who did not understand scale. He smirked. Everything all right, Nathan? Yes, I said. Just confirming something. And what would that be? Claire went still. I gave him a calm smile, not enough to warn him, only enough to let him underestimate me one more time. That scale makes small errors very expensive. Nobody laughed. For the rest of dinner, Julian talked louder. Claire smiled harder. The investors asked fewer social questions and more precise ones. By dessert, the room no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a witness list. The hallway outside the private dining room was quieter than the table had been, and that was where the real work began. I stood near the elevators with Chicago glittering beneath the glass and called Evelyn Hart, my divorce attorney in Arlington, Virginia. She answered on the 3rd ring. Tell me you are alone, she said. I am alone. Tell me you have not confronted your wife. I have not. Tell me you have not accused the other man of anything in public. I looked back through the glass doors. Julian was still performing at the table, hands moving in confident arcs while Claire watched him like ambition had learned to speak. I have not, I said. Good, Evelyn replied. You do not need a scene. You need separation, preservation, and clean lanes. That was Evelyn's gift. She could turn heartbreak into procedure without pretending the heartbreak was not there. I told her about the dinner, Julian's comments, Claire's bracelet, the vendor code, and Owen's preliminary findings. I did not embellish. I did not call Claire evil. I did not call Julian a criminal. I gave her facts, timestamps, witnesses, names, and language as close to exact as memory allowed. When I finished, she was quiet for a second. Nathan, there are two matters now. The marriage and the company. Correct. Do not mix them. Your wife's betrayal may explain your pain, but it cannot become the engine of the compliance review. If this looks personal, Julian will use it to poison every legitimate concern. I know. Then act like you know. No emotional texts. No hotel room argument. No public accusations. No threats. Preserve communications. Protect marital assets. Let the investor channel handle HelixBridge. I closed my eyes once, not because I was weak, but because discipline is heavier when the person you love has made herself part of the evidence. And Claire? I asked. Evelyn's voice softened slightly. Claire is your wife until the court says otherwise. Treat her civilly. Trust her with nothing financial. Speak as if every word may be read by a judge. After I ended the call, I called Owen. I need a clean chain, I said. Already building it, he replied. Northlake is thin, the patient contact clusters are too similar, and the expense code tied to the bracelet is not isolated. How many personal expenses? Enough to make general counsel unhappy. Not enough yet to prove knowledge. We need source. Validation. Through the investor group. That keeps your hands cleaner. That keeps the work honest. Owen paused. You all right? I looked through the glass. Claire was laughing at something Julian said. The Real laugh I used to hear in our kitchen before success became something she measured by who watched her enter a room. No, I said, but I am functional. Functional is enough for tonight. I returned to the table just long enough to see the mood shift from celebration to calculation. A Boston partner was asking about third-party validation. The hospital CFO wanted assumptions in writing. Outside counsel had stopped smiling. Julian still looked confident, but now his confidence had edges. Claire leaned toward him and said, loud enough for me to hear, "This is what happens when people are afraid of innovation." Julian touched her hand for half a second. That told me the story had not been improvised. They had practiced it together. Julian, the visionary. Claire, the woman finally appreciated. Nathan, the dull paperwork husband. Too cautious and too small for the future. It was almost elegant if you ignored the invoices. I left before coffee. Claire did not follow me. In the elevator, I opened a secure message to Martin Keene, the investment group's lead partner. I wrote that preliminary HelixBridge materials raised unresolved compliance concerns requiring independent validation before any funding commitment, public announcement, or contract reliance. I requested a formal preservation notice, source billing records, vendor documentation, patient engagement logs, and expense classifications tied to clinical adoption events. I did not mention my wife's insult. I did not mention Julian's hand on her back. Those belonged in the marriage file. The compliance file needed facts clean enough to survive review. In my hotel room, I locked the door, placed my wedding ring beside my laptop, and opened the draft petition Evelyn had sent months earlier when precaution still sounded dramatic. Now it had a name: Marital Asset Preservation. I reviewed the account list, disclosure requests, and proposed notice prohibiting either party from draining or hiding marital funds. Then I added one note: travel charges, luxury goods, and possible third-party benefits connected to HelixBridge events. At 11:42, Martin replied, "Do not circulate further." Counsel looped in. Funding pause under consideration. Secure channel only. At 11:51, Owen wrote, "Cross-deck uses projected savings as validated savings. Need raw data." At midnight, Evelyn sent one line: "Restraint is not surrender when it is documented." Downstairs, Julian probably thought he had taken my dignity. Claire probably thought I had walked away beaten. They did not understand the difference between retreat and distance created before consequences start landing. The next morning, Julian walked onto the main stage like a man who believed lighting could replace evidence. HelixBridge's logo stretched across the screen behind him, bright blue and expensive, promising smarter care, faster outcomes, national scale. Claire sat near the front in the reserved section, posture perfect, bracelet visible, face tilted toward the stage like she had personally helped build the future. I sat 12 rows behind her, close enough to hear the applause, far enough to watch the room instead of the performance. Julian opened with rural patients, overworked care teams, and artificial intelligence closing the gap. It was polished, emotional, safe for cameras. Then came the numbers. Engagement up 38%. Avoidable readmissions down 21%. Multi-market savings above projected benchmarks. He never said audited. He never said independently validated. He said demonstrated, proven, partner confirmed, and impact-driven. Those words sounded powerful to people hungry for innovation. To me, they sounded like doors without hinges. My phone vibrated once. Martin Keene, funding committee moved to 2:30. Council wants raw data before any public commitment. I put the phone away and kept listening. Then Julian clicked to the slide that mattered. $60 million in expansion pipeline. 3 hospital systems. 6 regional deployments. National payer conversations. Phones came up. People whispered. Claire scanned the room, drinking in the reaction as if applause could be deposited into a bank account. Then Julian made the mistake pride often makes. He improvised. The old way of healthcare demanded permission before progress, he said. When outcomes are real, the market moves first and the paperwork catches up. The crowd heard inspiration. I heard federal exposure. Paperwork does not catch up in healthcare. Paperwork proves the patient was real, the service happened, the vendor existed, the billing was lawful, and the savings were not invented. 10 minutes after Julian left the stage, the first door closed. Martin's group postponed its private signing session and requested a closed-door verification meeting. One hospital system asked for raw engagement logs, vendor contracts, and methodology support before issuing its expansion statement. A payer representative scheduled for a photo opportunity suddenly had a conflict. Julian did not know the full reason yet, but he felt the temperature change. At 1:15, I sat in a quiet conference room with Martin, 2 attorneys, Owen on secure video, and a hospital compliance officer. No one raised a voice. We used adult words because the stakes were too high for drama. Inconsistencies. Unverified vendor capacity. Unsupported savings claims. Expense classification concerns. Need for data preservation. Owen walked through the patterns calmly. Northlake's invoices did not match operational capacity. Patient contact records appeared duplicated across states. Engagement timestamps clustered in ways that did not fit real staffing models. Certain executive expenses had been assigned to clinical adoption categories without clear business justification. When the bracelet code appeared on the screen, I looked down at the table. Not because I was embarrassed, but because I refused to let my marriage become the headline in a compliance room. One attorney asked, "Is this connected to your spouse?" "It may be," I said. "That is why I am disclosing the conflict and separating the marital matter from this review. I will not be the sole handler of any evidence touching her." The attorney nodded. A clean process is armor. At 2:47, HelixBridge received formal preservation. Notice covering documents, communications, source data, vendor support, expense records, and presentation materials tied to the expansion pipeline. At 3:12, Julian called Claire. I saw her near a coffee station when her expression changed. The glow left first, then the confidence, then the illusion that Julian Cross controlled every room he entered. 20 minutes later, she found me near the escalators. "What did you do?" she asked. "Not are you all right? Not I am sorry. What did you do?" "I attended meetings," I said. "Julian says investors are pausing funding because of compliance concerns." "Then Julian should answer the compliance concerns. You are trying to ruin him because you are jealous." I looked at her calmly. Jealousy does not create duplicate patient records. It does not invent vendor capacity. It does not classify jewelry as clinical adoption. Her face went pale. "What jewelry?" Before she could recover, Julian called again. She stepped away, but her face told the story. Confusion, defense, fear, humiliation. He was not protecting her. He was measuring her usefulness. By evening, Julian's keynote clip was still circulating online, But the people who mattered were no longer discussing vision. They were asking for source files. Claire did not stand beside him at the reception. She stood near a pillar, holding a glass she barely touched, while he moved from group to group with a smile that had become work. Every few minutes, he glanced at her like she was a liability in a designer suit. Downstairs, Julian was learning applause cannot unlock frozen funding. Claire was learning status is poor shelter when the man providing it needs a scapegoat. And I was learning that the strongest thing I had done all week was stay silent when they expected me to break. The closed-door investor session was scheduled for 9 the next morning in a conference room with no stage, no music, no sponsor lights, and no room for Julian's favorite kind of magic. Due diligence rooms do not applaud. They have long tables, cold water bottles, wall screens, legal pads, and people whose job is to ask the questions everyone avoids until money is at risk. I arrived at 8:35 with Martin Keene, 2 attorneys from his investment group, Owen Price on secure video, and a compliance officer from one of the hospital systems Julian had been calling a major expansion partner. I wore the same navy suit I had worn when Claire let Julian turn me into a punchline. This time, everyone in the room knew why I was there. At 8:58, Julian walked in with his general counsel, his chief financial officer, and Claire. He did not expect me. I saw the exact moment he understood the seating chart. His eyes moved from Martin to the attorneys, then to the wall screen, then to me at the far end of the table with a folder in front of me. Claire froze half a step behind him. She had expected me outside the room, bitter maybe, wounded maybe, waiting for scraps of explanation from the man she thought had outranked me. She had not expected me to be part of the process that could decide whether Julian's company survived the week. Julian recovered first. "Is this really necessary?" he asked Martin. Martin did not smile. Given the funding size and the questions raised, yes. Julian looked at me. "And he is here in what capacity?" Before I answered, one attorney said, "Mr. Mercer has been retained as Special Healthcare Compliance Counsel for preliminary review. He has disclosed a personal conflict, and evidence handling will be supervised accordingly." Dry? Professional? Devastating. Julian could not call me a jealous husband without admitting he had misunderstood the room. Claire sat down without speaking. The bracelet was gone from her wrist. I noticed because records teach you to notice absence too. Martin opened by saying no final accusation was being made that morning. Serious people do not start with conclusions. They start with preservation, verification, and risk. Then Owen shared his screen. The first slide showed patient engagement logs from 3 states with identical timing clusters, repeated follow-up intervals, and outcome patterns that should not appear across unrelated regions. Different populations behave differently, Owen said. Different teams produce different workflow patterns. These records suggest copying, synthetic generation, or post hoc adjustment. We need raw source data to determine which. Julian leaned back. Predictive systems standardize workflow. That is the point. Owen did not blink. Standardized workflow does not create identical patient behavior across time zones. The chief financial officer stared at the table. Next came Northlake clinical integration. Invoice dates, service descriptions, registered address data, staffing indicators, and payment routing appeared on the screen. The hospital compliance officer asked whether Northlake had documented clinical personnel in the states where services had been billed. HelixBridge general counsel said they would need to confirm. Martin's attorney wrote that down. "We need to confirm" is not an answer investors enjoy after a public growth announcement. Then I took the presentation deck. I pointed to the slide where projected savings appeared under validated impact. "This language implies completed verification," I said. "The underlying files reviewed so far do not support that level of certainty." Julian finally leaned forward. "You are doing this because of Claire." The room went still. There it was, his escape hatch. Personal motive. Jealous husband. Domestic anger dressed as professional concern. I looked at him calmly. "No. I disclose Claire because clean process matters. This review exists because patient records, vendor invoices, investor materials, and possible federal reimbursement exposure do not exist to decorate your private life." Claire inhaled sharply. Julian's face tightened. "You have no idea what it takes to build at scale." "I know exactly what scale does," I said. It turns small, unsupported claims into large legal exposure. The hospital compliance officer requested data preservation certification by end of day. Martin suspended funding discussions until raw data, vendor support, and methodology could be independently verified. Julian looked to his general counsel for rescue. The counsel only asked for a recess. In the hallway, Claire followed me near the vending machines. "Did you plan this?" she whispered. "I plan to do my job. Julian says you are twisting things. Then he should untwist them with documents." She looked down at her bare wrist. "I did not know about the bracelet code. Did you ask who paid for it?" Her mouth opened, then closed. That was answer enough. By late afternoon, HelixBridge's board had opened an emergency governance review. Before the week ended, Julian was instructed to surrender his company laptop and phone to internal counsel for preservation imaging. Claire watched the man she called visionary get reduced to access credentials, device custody, and calendar preservation. He glanced at her once, and there was no affection in it, only calculation. That look did more damage than anything I could have said. As we left, Julian stepped close. "This is not over," he said. I met his eyes. "For once, Julian, you are right." I walked past him without raising my voice, without giving him the jealous scene he still wanted. The keynote video was still online that afternoon, his smile still shining under blue lights. But in the rooms where money, law, and records mattered, the empire had already started speaking in past tense. Claire did not come back to our hotel room until after 7 that evening. I was at the desk, separating my notes into 2 folders, one for the marriage and one for HelixBridge. That separation mattered. Pain wants to throw everything into one fire. Law asks which fact belongs where, who had notice, who benefited, who relied, and who can prove it without sounding like revenge. When the door opened, Claire stepped inside like the storm had finally reached her. Her hair was still perfect, but the confidence was gone. She looked at my laptop, the papers on the desk, and my wedding ring resting beside them. For once, she did not make a joke about spreadsheets. "Julian is being put on administrative leave," she said. "Pending review?" I asked. "Do not do that." "Do what?" "Talk like this is a committee meeting." I turned toward her. "Claire, this became a committee meeting when $60 million started depending on records that may not support the claims." She looked away toward the Chicago skyline, the kind of view she used to photograph when status still felt safe. "He says you set him up." "He would. He says you used our marriage to get access. The investor group retained me before I confirmed your involvement. That is documented." Her eyes sharpened. "He says Owen is misreading the data. Then Julian can provide the raw files." "You keep saying that like it is simple." "It is simple if the numbers are real." She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the suit she had chosen for the meeting. Without the bracelet, her wrist looked bare in a way that seemed to frighten her. "He called me after the board review," she said. "He was angry. With me." "Why with you?" "Because he thinks I told you things." "Did you?" "No." She said it too fast, then looked down. "I talked about work. Like anyone talks to their spouse." "You stopped talking to me like a spouse months ago." She did not deny it. "He said I should have known you were not harmless." Harmless. That was what Julian had needed me to be. A husband with hurt feelings. A man to mock at dinner. A small domestic obstacle between him and the woman who made him feel admired. "He told me you were trying to make me look guilty," she said. "No," I answered. "You did that when you accepted benefits you did not question, repeated his contempt in public, and let him use you as proof that he could take what belonged to another man without consequences." She flinched. "I did not know it was company money." "You did not want to know." Her phone rang before she could answer. Julian's name lit the screen. She stared at it like it might still rescue her. She answered and turned away, but the room was quiet enough for pieces to escape. I did not tell him. "Julian, you said it was handled. I never saw those files. Do not put this on me." I stayed still. I did not need every word. Her face translated the rest. Julian was not protecting her. He was looking for the weakest wall in the structure. Then her voice rose. "You gave me the bracelet. You booked the suite. You told me those dinners were partnership expenses." A pause. Her face went colorless. "What do you mean I wanted access?" That was the moment the fantasy lost its stage lights. Julian remembered her appetite as clearly as I did, and he was ready to use it. When the call ended, she whispered, "He is going to blame me. He is going to blame anyone who can carry weight for him. You have to help me. Not I am sorry. Not I betrayed you. Not I humiliated you. You have to help me." I opened Evelyn's leather folder and placed it on the desk. I am helping myself now. Claire saw the first page. Petition for divorce. Her mouth parted like the word had never occurred to her while she was building another life in front of me. Nathan, do not do this here. You did this here. I am only filing the paperwork where the facts finally caught up. She reached for the folder, then stopped at the next page. Marital asset preservation. Accounting request. Travel charges. Luxury items. Third-party benefits. I can explain some of it, she whispered. Then explain it to your attorney. She stared at me like I had become someone else. I had not. I had become someone she could no longer soften with history. Downstairs, Julian's company was folding inward under board calls and preservation notices. Upstairs, Claire's version of our marriage was collapsing under the same force. Records. Choices. Consequences. She thought silence meant I was too weak to fight. She never understood I was giving everyone time to reveal exactly who they were. 6 months later, the conference lights were gone, the sponsor banners were gone, and Julian Cross no longer appeared on the HelixBridge website. His resignation statement said he was stepping away to focus on personal matters and support the company during a period of transition. That sentence meant almost nothing, which was why lawyers loved it. The documents meant more. The investor group withdrew from the funding round. 2 hospital systems suspended implementation. 1 payer canceled exploratory talks. HelixBridge's board opened an internal review that quickly became too large to keep inside the company. Federal investigators requested preservation of electronic communications, vendor records, billing support, patient engagement logs, and materials tied to reimbursement-linked claims. No one dragged Julian out of a ballroom. No one needed to. In America, consequences with letterhead can be quieter than handcuffs and still destroy a man's calendar, reputation, access, and future. Northlake Clinical Integration collapsed first. It had no staffing footprint capable of supporting services billed across multiple states. The engagement data used in HelixBridge's expansion story contained duplicate clusters, altered timestamps, and outcome language that looked cleaner on slides than in source files. The diamond bracelet never became the center of the federal inquiry, but it mattered in the divorce because marriages do not usually die from one dramatic wound. They die from 1,000 small withdrawals no one wants to count until the account is empty. Claire tried to call after we returned to Virginia. I answered only when Evelyn said I should, and only in writing when writing protected the record. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted her back, but because discipline does not erase memory. I still remembered vending machine pretzels outside the courthouse after we married, the apartment with the broken dishwasher, the Sunday drives through Shenandoah, and the first Christmas tree we bought at a hardware store because we could not afford the expensive lot. Those memories were real. So was the woman who laughed while Julian reduced me to a joke in front of strangers. Both truths had to live in the same file. Our divorce mediation took place in a plain Fairfax County office with beige walls, bad coffee, and a mediator who had seen enough broken marriages to stop acting surprised. Claire arrived in a navy dress, no bracelet, no conference glow, no man beside her. Her attorney carried a folder thick enough to prove she finally understood paperwork. She tried the word manipulated first. Evelyn did not react. I did not react. Claire said Julian had made her feel valued, blurred lines, handled expenses, and never explained the compliance risk. When she finished, Evelyn slid over a timeline. Flights, hotels, private dinners, luxury items, messages where Claire mocked my work, dates when she told me she was in one city while records placed her in another. It was not presented with cruelty. That made it worse. Cruelty gives people something to fight. Accuracy gives them a mirror. Claire looked at me and whispered, "You kept all of this?" "No," I said. "You created it." Her face tightened. I lost everything. I looked at her then, not as my wife, not as Julian's discarded liability, but as a person finally standing inside the consequences she had chosen. "You lost the things you traded for," I said. "That is not the same as having them stolen." She cried quietly after that. I did not comfort her. Comfort would have been dishonest, and dishonesty had already taken enough from us. The final agreement protected my consulting practice, credited disputed marital spending, separated our accounts, and ended the marriage without a trial. Claire did not go to jail. She was not the architect of Julian's scheme, but she lost her executive role, lost the network she had worshipped, lost the man who promised her a bigger life, and lost the husband she had mistaken for an obstacle. Julian's road was darker. His attorneys fought civil claims. The company distanced itself from him. Federal review continued, and when investigators asked for preserved communications, vendor support, reimbursement claims, and investor materials, they are not admiring your vision. They are measuring exposure. A year after the conference, I moved into a townhouse in Alexandria, not far from the Potomac. I kept the Ford Explorer. I kept my work. I kept my name intact. Claire thought silence meant I was weak. Julian thought humiliation meant he had won. They were both wrong. Real power does not always enter a room loudly. Sometimes it sits at the far end of the table, waits for everyone to finish performing, and then asks for the raw data.